Did you know that Florida has more lightning strikes than anywhere else in America? Or that there's a town completely surrounded by Disney World? How about the fact that Florida is slowly sinking into the ocean? Well, Florida is a state that is full of crazy facts like this. So, settle in because we're about to reel off 50 of the wildest facts about Florida that you probably never knew. Fact 50. An ancient underwater cave system. Beneath Florida's surface lies one of the world's longest underwater cave systems. The Waukulla-Leon Sinks stretches over 32 miles, with divers finding Ice Age fossils including mastodons and giant sloths preserved in crystal-clear limestone chambers. Fact 49. The lightning capital of America. Florida gets hit with more lightning than anywhere else in the United States, averaging about 25 strikes per square mile each year. The corridor between Tampa and Orlando is especially brutal, earning the nickname Lightning Alley. Between 1959 and 2003, Florida recorded 10 times more lightning deaths than California. Fact 48. A coral reef in your backyard. Florida is home to the only living coral barrier reef in the continental United States. Stretching nearly 360 miles, the Florida Reef is the third largest coral barrier reef system in the world, packed with over 45 species of stony corals and 500 species of fish. Fact 47. The swamp that's actually a river. The Everglades isn't a swamp at all. It's a river. A really slow, really wide river. Often called the River of Grass, the Everglades is actually a 60-mile-wide sheet of water flowing from Lake Okeechobee south to Florida Bay at a rate of about half a mile per day. The water is only a few inches to a few feet deep, moving so slowly you can barely see it flow. This unique ecosystem covers 1.5 million acres and is the only place on Earth where alligators and crocodiles coexist in the wild. It's not just wetlands, it's a massive, moving watershed unlike anything else on the planet. Fact 46. Hurricane Andrew's wind mystery. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew slammed into South Florida with winds so powerful they destroyed every wind measuring instrument in its path. The official maximum sustained wind speed was recorded at 165 miles per hour, but engineers who examined the damage believe gusts may have reached 200 miles per hour or higher. We'll never know for sure because all the equipment was obliterated. Andrew flattened entire neighborhoods in Homestead, snapped concrete power poles like toothpicks, and drove pieces of straw through palm trees. The storm was so intense it actually changed how hurricanes are measured and how Florida builds its homes. Fact 45. The southernmost point isn't where you think. Everyone flocks to the famous buoy in Key West, marking the southernmost point in the continental USA. But here's the thing, it's not actually the southernmost point. That distinction belongs to Ballast Key, a small, uninhabited island about 9 miles west. Even on Key West itself, a naval base sits further south than the tourist monument. The real reason for the marker? It's at the southernmost point the public can access by road. Still, over 1 million tourists line up each year to snap photos at the colorful concrete buoy, making it one of the most photographed spots in Florida. Fact 43. The Fountain of Youth nobody found. Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon never actually searched for the Fountain of Youth in Florida. That's right, the most famous story about Florida's discovery is mostly fiction. Ponce de Leon arrived in 1513 looking for gold, slaves, and land, not magical water. The Fountain of Youth legend was added decades later by a rival Spanish historian trying to make Ponce de Leon look foolish. Today, St. Augustine capitalizes on the myth with a Fountain of Youth archaeological park where tourists can sip sulfur-tasting spring water. The legend stuck, even though it never happened. Fact 42. Bioluminescent waters. On warm summer nights in certain Florida waters, something magical happens. The Indian River Lagoon and Banana River light up with bioluminescent dinoflagellates, tiny organisms that glow neon blue when disturbed. Kayakers paddle through water that sparkles with every stroke, leaving trails of electric blue light. Fish darting beneath the surface create glowing streaks. Wave your hand and watch the water explode in blue fire. This natural light show happens thanks to millions of these microscopic creatures responding to movement. Peak bioluminescence season runs from June through October, turning Florida's waters into a real-life avatar world. Fact 41. The state is literally sinking. Florida isn't just threatened by rising seas, the land itself is sinking. Sinkholes are a constant problem across the state, with Florida having more sinkholes than anywhere else in America. The entire state sits on porous limestone that's slowly dissolving as acidic groundwater eats away at it from below. In 2013, a sinkhole in Seffner swallowed a man's bedroom while he slept. He was never found. These collapses can happen without warning, anywhere from suburban yards to busy highways. Insurance companies now have special sinkhole coverage because it's such a common threat. Florida's limestone foundation is essentially Swiss cheese, and it's getting more fragile every year. Fact 40. 3 record-breaking springs. Florida has over 1,000 natural springs, more than any other state, and several hold world records. Wakulla Springs, near Tallahassee, is one of the world's largest and deepest freshwater springs, pumping out 250 million gallons of crystal-clear water daily. Silver Springs was once one of Florida's top tourist attractions, with glass-bottom boats that became famous in the 1800s. And Rainbow Springs lives up to its name, with water so clear you can see 200 feet down. These springs maintain a constant temperature of 72 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, making them perfect for manatees seeking warmth in winter and humans seeking relief in summer. Fact 39. Alligators in swimming pools. In Florida, finding an alligator in your backyard isn't just possible, it's common. The state is home to over 1.3 million alligators, living in every county. They show up in swimming pools, golf course ponds, parking lots, and even inside houses. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission receives over 16,000 alligator complaints annually. Any body of fresh water in Florida, no matter how small, could have a gator in it. They can run up to 35 miles per hour in short bursts and are most active during mating season in May and June. Despite their numbers, fatal attacks are rare, with only 26 deaths since 1948. Still, the rule in Florida is simple. If there's water, assume there's a gator. Fact 38. The skunk ape. Florida has its own version of Bigfoot called the skunk ape, and people still report seeing it. Described as a 7-foot-tall, ape-like creature that smells terrible, hence the name, sightings have been reported throughout the Everglades since the 1960s. The most famous evidence came in 2000, when an anonymous woman mailed photographs to the Sarasota Sheriff's Office showing a large, reddish-brown creature in her backyard. Believers say it's an undiscovered primate. Skeptics say it's just people seeing black bears, which can walk upright. Either way, the legend persists, and the small town of Ochapee even has a skunk ape research headquarters. Whether real or not, the skunk ape has become part of Florida folklore. Fact 37. A highway built on water. The Overseas Highway, stretching from Miami to Key West, is one of the most spectacular drives in America, but its history is wild. It was originally a railroad built by Henry Flagler in the early 1900s, an engineering marvel dubbed the eighth wonder of the world. The 1935 Labor Day hurricane, one of the strongest to ever hit the U.S., destroyed much of it, killing over 400 people. The railroad was never rebuilt, but its bridges were converted into a highway. Today, the 113-mile road includes the famous 7-Mile Bridge, where you're driving over open ocean with nothing but water on both sides. It feels more like flying than driving. Fact 36. Prehistoric giants roamed here recently. Florida was once home to some of the most terrifying Ice Age creatures imaginable. Giant ground sloths as tall as elephants, saber-toothed cats, dire wolves, and mastodons all roamed the state as recently as 10,000 years ago. At Fossil Rim in Sarasota, you can see where these creatures gathered. The state's rivers and sinkholes regularly cough up Ice Age fossils, including complete skeletons. Amateur fossil hunters wade into rivers like the Peace River and find megalodon shark teeth bigger than your hand. Florida's warm climate preserved these remains beautifully, creating one of the richest fossil beds in North America. Fact 35. Singing sand and squeaking beaches. Some of Florida's beaches don't just look beautiful, they make music. Siesta Key Beach, which has some of the whitest, finest sand in the world, actually squeaks when you walk on it. The sand is 99% pure quartz crystal, ground down over millions of years into powder-fine grains. When these perfectly rounded grains rub together under your feet, they create a distinctive squeaking or singing sound. The sand here is so reflective and white that it stays cool even in scorching summer heat. Siesta Key has repeatedly won awards for having America's best beach, and once you sink your toes into that squeaky, snow-white sand, you'll understand why. Fact 34. The town surrounded by Disney. Ever heard of Celebration? It's a town built by Disney in the 1990s as an experiment in ideal community living. But even stranger is Bay Lake, a tiny city of about 50 residents completely surrounded by Walt Disney World property. It was incorporated in 1967 specifically to give Disney control over the land. The residents are mostly Disney executives. This allowed Disney to essentially govern itself for decades through the Reedy Creek Improvement District. In 2023, Florida dissolved this special district after a political battle, ending one of the strangest municipal arrangements in American history. For over 50 years, Disney World was practically its own government. Fact 33. The Bermuda Triangle's corner. One corner of the infamous Bermuda Triangle sits right off Florida's coast. The triangle's points connect Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, and the area has a legendary reputation for mysterious disappearances. Flight 19, a group of 5 Navy torpedo bombers, vanished without a trace near Florida in 1945, followed by the rescue planes sent to find them. Ships and planes have disappeared here under strange circumstances for decades. While most scientists attribute the disappearances to natural causes like sudden storms, strong currents, and methane gas eruptions from the seafloor, the mystery persists. Whatever the truth, South Florida sits at the edge of one of the ocean's most infamous zones. Fact 32. America's oldest city. St. Augustine isn't just old for America, it's the oldest continuously inhabited European established settlement in the continental United States. Founded by Spanish explorers in 1565, St. Augustine is older than Jamestown by 42 years and predates the Pilgrims by 55 years. You can walk cobblestone streets laid down 300 years ago, visit the Castillo de San Marcos fortress, built from 1672 to 1695, and see the oldest wooden schoolhouse in America. The city has been under 5 different flags: Spanish, British, Confederate, American, and Spanish again. When you visit St. Augustine, you're not just seeing history, you're stepping into America's actual beginning. Fact 31. Pink flamingos aren't native. Despite being plastered all over Florida postcards and lawn ornaments, pink flamingos aren't actually native to Florida. Wild flamingos were once common here, but were hunted to extinction for their feathers in the 1800s. The flamingos you see at places like Miami's Hialeah Park or various zoos are all imported. However, there's been a twist. In recent years, small flocks of wild flamingos have started showing up in Florida again, apparently blown in from the Caribbean by hurricanes. Scientists are debating whether these recent visitors are recolonizing or just hurricane refugees. Either way, Florida's most iconic bird is technically an immigrant, making those plastic lawn flamingos more accurate than you'd think. Fact 30. Moonbows at Cumberland Island. Just off Florida's northeast coast near the Georgia border, Cumberland Island occasionally displays something magical: moonbows. These are rainbows created by moonlight instead of sunlight. When conditions are perfect with a full moon, clear skies, and mist from the ocean, you can see these ghostly, silvery arcs over the water. They're much fainter than regular rainbows, and appear almost translucent. The phenomenon is so rare that most people go their entire lives without seeing one. But in this corner of Florida, where sea spray meets moonlight, nature puts on one of its most subtle and beautiful shows. Fact 29. Miami and the Keys are moving. Florida sits on the North American tectonic plate, but it's not exactly stable. The entire Florida peninsula is slowly tilting and shifting. South Florida is gradually sinking, while North Florida is slightly rising. Tidal gauges in Key West show sea levels rising faster than the global average, partly because the land itself is subsinking. Meanwhile, the Gulf Stream's powerful current constantly reshapes the coast. Geologists predict that in millions of years, the Florida we know might look completely different, or might not exist at all above water. The Sunshine State is literally on the move, just very, very slowly. Fact 28. The Village of Islands. The Florida Keys are actually the exposed portions of an ancient coral reef. This 120-mile-long archipelago consists of over 1,700 islands, though only about 30 are inhabited. Key Largo, the longest at 30 miles, sits on fossilized coral that's over 125,000 years old. The islands are so low-lying that the highest natural point in the entire Keys is only 18 feet above sea level. Many of these islands are so small they don't even have names. Some are just mangrove clumps barely poking above the water. Together, they form a tropical necklace stretching into the Caribbean, a fragile string of islands that hurricanes regularly try to break apart. Fact 27. Miniature key deer. On Big Pine Key and a few surrounding islands lives one of Florida's most adorable endangered species, the key deer. These tiny deer stand only about 2 to 3 feet tall at the shoulder and weigh between 55 to 75 pounds, about the size of a large dog. They're a subspecies of white-tailed deer that evolved to be smaller due to island dwarfism. Only about 800 of these miniature deer exist in the wild, all confined to a few square miles of habitat. They're so tame that they'll walk right up to people, though feeding them is illegal. Seeing a fawn is almost comical. They're no bigger than a house cat. Rising sea levels and habitat loss threaten their tiny island homes. Fact 26. Devil's Den Underground Spring near Williston, Florida. There's an underground spring hidden inside a dry cave that looks like something from a fantasy novel. Devil's Den is a prehistoric subterranean spring inside a karst window, essentially a collapsed limestone cave that opened up about 25,000 years ago. Inside, a pool of crystal-clear 72-degree Fahrenheit water sits beneath a ceiling with an opening that lets sunlight stream in, creating dramatic light beams underwater. Scuba divers and snorkelers descend into this underground cathedral year-round. Fossils of extinct animals have been found here, and on cool mornings, steam rises from the opening like the cave is breathing. It's one of Florida's most unique natural attractions. Fact 25. The Coral Castle Mystery. In Homestead stands one of Florida's strangest monuments, Coral Castle. Between 1923 and 1951, a single man named Edward Leedskalnin built this massive structure entirely alone, using over 1,100 tons of coral rock. The largest stones weigh more than a Stonehenge monolith. Here's the mystery. Ed stood only 5 feet tall and weighed 100 pounds. He worked only at night and never allowed anyone to watch. He claimed to know the secrets of the pyramids. When neighbors asked how he moved such massive stones, he'd only say he knew the secret of how the pyramids were built. To this day, engineers are baffled by how one tiny man accomplished this feat without modern machinery. The castle includes perfectly balanced rocking chairs, a sundial, and a 9-ton gate that once moved at the touch of a finger. Fact 24. Jellyfish that invade by the millions. Every few years, Florida's beaches experience massive jellyfish blooms that cover miles of coastline. During these invasions, moon jellyfish, cannonball jellyfish, or Portuguese man-o'-wars wash ashore by the millions, creating gelatinous carpets several feet thick. In 2017, a bloom was so massive that beaches in Palm Beach County were closed for days. Some blooms are harmless, but Portuguese man-o'-war invasions can be dangerous. Their tentacles deliver painful stings even when the creature is dead. Scientists link these blooms to warming ocean temperatures, overfishing, which removes jellyfish predators, and nutrient runoff. When a bloom hits, locals avoid the beach and the smell of rotting jellyfish can be overwhelming. Fact 23. Rainbow-colored rivers. Several of Florida's springs create rivers with water so clear and colorful they look fake. Rainbow Springs produces water in shades of blue and green so vibrant it looks like someone added dye. Tectonic Springs creates a river that looks like liquid glass, so transparent you can see every pebble on the bottom 10 feet down. Ginny Springs glows an otherworldly blue. This incredible clarity comes from the limestone's natural filtration system. Water that fell as rain decades ago percolates through limestone for years before emerging crystal clear and mineral-rich. Tubers and kayakers float down these streams in water so pure and beautiful it feels surreal. Fact 22. The bay that disappeared and returned. Apalachicola Bay in the Panhandle used to be one of the most productive oyster fisheries in the nation, but it nearly died. By 2020, the oyster population had collapsed by 99% due to drought, reduced freshwater flow, and overharvesting. The bay almost became an ecological dead zone. Then, after years of restoration efforts, careful management, and favorable weather, the oysters started coming back. By 2023, harvests were recovering. This cycle of death and rebirth shows how fragile Florida's ecosystems are. The bay depends on a precise balance of fresh water from rivers and salt water from the Gulf. When that balance breaks, entire economies collapse. Fact 21. The ghost orchid. Deep in Florida's swamps grows one of the world's most mysterious flowers, the ghost orchid. This rare, leafless plant appears to float in mid-air since its roots blend with the tree bark it clings to. It blooms sporadically and unpredictably, with flowers that look like white frogs leaping through the air. Only giant sphinx moths with foot-long tongues can pollinate them. The ghost orchid became famous through the book The Orchid Thief, and poachers have been arrested trying to steal them from places like Fakahatchee Strand. Fewer than 2,000 exist in the wild, all in South Florida and Cuba. Seeing one bloom in the wild is considered a near-mystical experience among botanists. Fact 20. A creek that runs backward. Sebastian Inlet has a creek that changes direction with the tides. The Indian River Lagoon is technically not a river at all, but a 156-mile-long estuary where saltwater and freshwater mix. When the tide comes in, the river flows north. When it goes out, it flows south. This creates bizarre situations where boaters can be traveling with the current 1 hour and against it the next without changing direction. The entire system is incredibly shallow, averaging only 4 feet deep, making it one of the most biodiverse estuaries in North America, with over 4,300 species of plants and animals. Fact 19. World's hottest lightning. Florida doesn't just have the most lightning, it has some of the hottest. A lightning bolt can heat the air around it to 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. Florida's frequent lightning strikes have ignited countless wildfires over the centuries, creating a landscape that's actually adapted to regular burning. Longleaf pine forests, once covering much of Florida, depend on lightning fires to clear undergrowth and help their seeds germinate. Some of Florida's plants literally need to be burned to survive, making lightning both destructive and essential to the ecosystem. Fact 18. Tarpon Springs Greek heritage. Tarpon Springs has the highest percentage of Greek Americans of any city in the U.S. In the early 1900s, Greek sponge divers from the Aegean Sea were recruited to harvest natural sponges from the Gulf of Mexico. They brought their families, their food, their language, and their traditions. Today, you can walk down Dodecanese Boulevard, eat authentic Greek food, watch traditional dances, and attend Greek Orthodox services. The sponge industry has declined, but the culture remains incredibly strong. It's like a piece of Greece transplanted to Florida's Gulf Coast, complete with annual festivals celebrating Epiphany with diving for a cross. Fact 17. 11 different ecosystems. Florida might look flat and samey, but it actually contains 11 distinct ecosystems, more diversity than most states twice its size. You've got coastal dunes, mangrove swamps, hardwood hammocks, pine flatwoods, freshwater marshes, salt marshes, coral reefs, seagrass beds, cypress swamps, scrubland, and tropical hardwood forests. Each ecosystem has its own unique plants and animals. A morning hike through a cypress dome looks and feels completely different from an afternoon walk through a coastal hammock. This diversity is why Florida has more species of plants and animals than almost any other state. Fact 16. The Republic of West Florida. In 1810, for exactly 90 days, part of what is now the Florida Panhandle and coastal areas of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama declared independence as the Republic of West Florida. American settlers in Spanish-controlled territory rebelled, stormed the Spanish fort at Baton Rouge, and raised their own flag, a single white star on a blue field, the Bonnie Blue flag. They elected a president, wrote a constitution, and declared themselves a free nation. The whole thing lasted 3 months before the United States annexed the territory. The Bonnie Blue flag later became a Confederate symbol, but it started as the flag of Florida's forgotten republic. Fact 15. Ybor City's cigar empire. Tampa's Ybor City was once the cigar capital of the world. In the late 1800s, cigar manufacturers moved to Tampa from Key West and Cuba, eventually producing 700 million hand-rolled cigars a year by 1929. Entire neighborhoods were built around cigar factories, with workers from Cuba, Spain, Italy, and Germany creating a unique multicultural community. Lectores would read newspapers and novels aloud to workers as they rolled cigars. At its peak, over 200 cigar factories operated here. Today, you can still see the historic buildings and watch artisans hand-roll cigars using techniques from the 1800s. The smell of tobacco still lingers in the old brick buildings. Fact 14. Mangroves with passport rights. Florida's mangrove forests are some of the only trees with something like international protection status. The 3 species found here, red, black, and white mangroves, create dense coastal forests that protect shorelines from hurricanes, filter pollution, and provide nurseries for fish. A single acre of mangroves can be worth $250,000 in ecosystem services. They're one of Florida's most important ecosystems, yet about half have been destroyed for development. Now they're fiercely protected. These trees can survive in salt water by filtering salt through their roots and even breathing through specialized pores. Their tangled roots create mazes that juvenile fish, shrimp, and crabs depend on for survival. Fact 13. The Forgotten Coast. Florida's Panhandle has a stretch called the Forgotten Coast for good reason. This 200-mile section between Panama City and Tallahassee has stayed remarkably undeveloped compared to the rest of Florida. Towns like Apalachicola, St. George Island, and Carabel feel frozen in time, with old Florida fishing villages, empty beaches, and none of the high-rise condos that dominate most of the state. The area has poor highway access, which kept developers away and preserved its character. If you want to see what Florida looked like 50 years ago before the tourism boom, this is it. White sand beaches with almost nobody on them. Fact 12. Florida's coldest temperature. While Florida is famous for heat, it can get surprisingly cold. The state record low is -2 degrees Fahrenheit, recorded in Tallahassee on February 13, 1899. That same cold snap brought snow to Miami and Tampa for the first and only times in recorded history. Jacksonville has recorded snow several times. The cold can be devastating. Massive freezes in the 1890s and 1980s wiped out orange groves and pushed citrus farming further south. North Florida can experience hard freezes several times each winter, killing tropical plants and sending iguanas falling from trees, frozen solid but often still alive. Fact 11. Pink lakes of the Gulf Coast. Hidden along Florida's Gulf Coast are scattered pink-tinted lakes and ponds, especially visible from the air. These colored waters come from high concentrations of beta-carotene produced by microscopic algae and salt-loving bacteria called halophiles that thrive in super salty conditions. Commonly seen near salt marshes and in areas with high evaporation, the vivid pink and red hues look almost artificial. Photographers flock to spot these naturally colored waters, which can range from subtle pink to intense magenta depending on salinity levels and season. They're temporary and unpredictable, appearing and disappearing based on rainfall and salt concentration. Fact 10. The most symmetrical sinkhole lake. Lake Jackson near Tallahassee is a nearly perfect circular lake that periodically drains away completely through sinkholes at its bottom, an event locals call the dry down. The most dramatic disappearance happened in 2021 when almost the entire lake drained in days, leaving boats stranded on mud, revealing a moonscape of cracks, and exposing fish flopping in puddles as birds feasted. Then, just as mysteriously, it refilled. This happens because limestone sinkholes at the lake bottom occasionally unclog, creating giant drains. Native Americans called it the lake that comes and goes. It's Florida's disappearing act, a reminder that nothing in the state is permanent. Fact 9. Otherworldly cypress domes. Throughout Florida's wetlands are cypress domes, circular stands of bald cypress trees that create perfect dome shapes when viewed from above. The trees are tallest in the center where the water is deepest and gradually shorter toward the edges, creating a natural dome profile. These ancient formations are incredibly important ecosystems, providing habitat for countless species. Walking into a cypress dome feels like entering a cathedral, with massive trunks rising from black water draped in Spanish moss, knees, root projections, poking up everywhere, and an eerie stillness. Some of these cypress trees are over 500 years old, silent witnesses to 5 centuries of Florida history. Fact 8. The secret largest tree. While California has the famous giant sequoias, Florida has its own giant, and most people don't know about it. The Senator, a bald cypress in Longwood, was the largest bald cypress tree in the United States and one of the oldest trees in the world at 3,500 years old. Sadly, in 2012, it burned down due to arson, but its clone, Lady Liberty, still stands nearby at 2,000 years old and 89 feet tall. These massive cypresses are living connections to ancient Florida, having been saplings when ancient Greece was at its peak. A new senator has been planted, cloned from the original, beginning the cycle again. Fact 7. Crystal River's manatee gathering. Every winter, hundreds of manatees gather at Crystal River's springs for one of nature's most charming spectacles. The springs maintain a constant 72 degrees Fahrenheit, creating warm refuges when Gulf waters drop below 68 degrees Fahrenheit. At peak season, over 600 manatees crowd into Kings Bay, creating manatee traffic jams. It's the only place in the U.S. where swimming with manatees is legal, though strict rules protect them. These gentle giants, weighing up to 1,200 pounds, are curious and sometimes approach swimmers. Watching dozens of manatees floating peacefully in crystal-clear spring water, their whiskered faces occasionally surfacing for air, is magical. They're Florida's most beloved marine mammal. Fact 6. The Dry Tortuga's mysterious fort. 70 miles west of Key West sit the Dry Tortugas, 7 small islands where Fort Jefferson, America's largest masonry fort, dominates tiny Garden Key. Built with 16 million bricks between 1846 and 1875, this massive hexagonal fortress was never completed and never saw combat. It became a military prison, where Dr. Samuel Mudd was sent for treating John Wilkes Booth after Lincoln's assassination. The fort seems absurdly oversized for such a tiny remote island. Today it's only accessible by boat or seaplane, surrounded by incredible coral reefs and sea turtles. The clear water is so stunning that the fort appears to float on blue glass. Why they built such an enormous fort here remains one of Florida's architectural mysteries. Fact 5. Shipwreck Treasure Coast. Florida's eastern coast from Sebastian Inlet to Fort Pierce is called the Treasure Coast for good reason. In 1715,
a Spanish treasure fleet of 11 ships was destroyed by a hurricane, scattering gold, silver, and jewels across the ocean floor. Even today, treasure hunters still find coins and artifacts washing up on beaches after storms. Over $400 million in treasure has been recovered, but estimates suggest billions worth remain scattered in the sand and reef. Anyone with a metal detector can legally search the beaches, and people still find Spanish gold coins, emeralds, and silver artifacts over 300 years old. The ocean occasionally returns pieces of this fortune during storms. Fact 4. Pocket-sized island raccoons. Florida's small coastal islands are home to smaller raccoons that evolved to fit their island environment. On islands like Caladesi and Honeymoon Island near Clearwater, the resident raccoons are noticeably smaller than their mainland cousins, a phenomenon called insular dwarfism. With limited food sources and territory, smaller body size became advantageous. These mini raccoons are bold and curious, often approaching beachgoers looking for snacks, though feeding them is illegal. They represent a snapshot of evolution in action, showing how isolated populations adapt to their environment within just a few generations. Fact 3. An underwater forest. Off the coast of Alabama and Florida, 60 feet beneath the Gulf of Mexico, lies an entire forest, preserved underwater for 60,000 years. When sea levels were much lower during the last ice age, this was dry land covered in bald cypress trees. As the glaciers melted and seas rose, the forest was submerged and buried under sediment, perfectly preserved in an oxygen-free environment. Hurricane Katrina's powerful waves uncovered it in 2004. Divers who visited say the wood looks fresh, the bark is still on the trees, and you can still smell the cypress scent. It's a haunting time capsule from a Florida that existed when woolly mammoths still roamed the land.
Fact 2. One of the oldest living inhabitants in Florida's warm waters lives one of the oldest organisms on Earth. Elkhorn coral colonies in the Keys can live for thousands of years. But even older might be the massive brain coral colonies that grow incredibly slowly, adding just a few millimeters per year. Some of these coral heads may be over 900 years old, meaning they were already growing when Columbus arrived in the Americas. These ancient corals have survived countless hurricanes, temperature swings, and now face their biggest threat: climate change and ocean acidification. They're living libraries of ocean history, with their growth bands recording centuries of environmental changes. Fact 1. The town of endless festivals. No state celebrates its weirdness quite like Florida, and no place exemplifies this better than Key West's endless calendar of bizarre festivals. There's the Zombie Bike Ride, Hemingway Days, featuring a lookalike contest, Fantasy Fest, to name a few.